Hello, welcome to episode 2 of season 2 of my interview series. I'm your host, Lionel Ninguino, King of YYC, self-proclaimed course. My pronouns are he and him, and I'm here with Kthechosen. So I will let you introduce yourself and don't be afraid to be humble. Add a little bit of thought into it.
Thanks, Lionel. I love that you took something I just said and like threw it right back at me. Yeah, so I'm Kay the Chosen. I'm a hip hop artist and soon to be graduate from the University of Calgary. I finished my degree last December. Just kind of waiting for convocation, which will probably be virtual, but I'm just grateful to be done. And yeah, no, like I said, I'm a hip hop artist. I like to talk about social issues. I was also very involved on campus with anything to do with consent or sex positivity. And then obviously being a person of color, a lot of anti-racist or decolonial work tends to kind of come in either in my music or in other associations I am a part of or like involved with. And yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Definitely, definitely. So you know that we're in that second l- second wave of lockdown in
Yeah.
Alberta. So how are you and what have you been up to since the beginning of what is happening with the reflection?
So yeah, it's been weird because I guess we didn't get much of a break from the first lockdown. It kind of just got extended, and then when the second one, I was like, "All right, cool." But I've definitely used the time to get into a lot more reading, and yeah, I just like really enjoy just reading different kinds of books. So I've been doing a lot of reading. I've also been working on a lot of music. Now that I'm done school, I'm like, cool. I've got more time to like do creative things. Um, so yeah, I think that's pretty much it. It's just been reading and music has been majority of what I've been doing since the second lockdown got put into place.
What book have you been reading?
Love that you asked. So I'm currently reading The Tanning of America, which is a book by Steve Stout. He's marketing genius. He was also a record label executive before that. A lot of people probably know him as the owner of United Masters, which is like I guess you'd call it a digital aggregator for music. So you upload your music to their platform, then they can send it to Spotify and other streaming services. So the book is about how hip hop culture has influenced marketing and businesses in America, just based on the fact that it is something that starts off as primarily a black thing, and then it gets into mainstream culture and everybody likes it, and then it influences the way that marketing messages change. It influences like the direction businesses go in, and it also just like influences the general culture of the United States, which then like affects the general culture of the world because we tend to follow what's going on in the West. So it's a really interesting, excuse me, book to read as an artist, but also interesting to read from a marketing perspective, but also just to kind of see the impact that I guess Black culture has on the world's history and the world's culture.
Definitely, definitely. And I think like hip hop, like I'm a big hip hop fan myself, and hip hop just like bring like a new perspective on how we market, how we communicate to customers, and look at this, look at this, look at this. Like sneakers is a big part of like that black basketball hip hop culture because I remember like seeing like hip hop artists
Mhm.
showing off their sneakers
Yeah,
like I think it's one DMC with a Adidas superstar
yeah,
sneaker make them famous and
yeah,
like with Adidas talking about Adidas Ad- hip hop made Adidas relevant in their
100%.
sneakers, right? With Kanye West, Snoop Dogg, One DMC, and like so much others. Yeah, I know my Apple.
Yeah, you do. That's literally one of the stories in the book. He talks about how Run DMC's song "My Adidas," helped Adidas come back and get a market share after they were losing to Nike and Reebok. So 100%, you're so correct.
Yeah, yeah, and my other because you talk about the Apple community and you belong into like a lot of communities when we talk all the time. So
Mhm.
what is I know I asked you this question so many times. You
Yeah.
probably get really tired. But what is what that community mean to you? And why is it important? Why is community important?
I love how you're quite right. We've asked this question a couple of times, but I think each time the meaning changes a little bit for me. And I think that might also be, I guess, a part of the definition of community. It can be a group of people that you connect with or have similarities with, but also the fact that that group of people can change, right? So if let's start off with the idea of hip hop. If you are a hip hop head, you've got that hip hop community, but then you might gravitate towards one part of hip hop. Let's say you're a dancer, like you do breakdance and all that. Your community will still be hip hop, but then now you're gravitating towards the people who dance. But so you haven't rejected hip hop as a community. You're just in a more niche group within the community. And I think with that in mind, community is super important right now, in particular, because the world is going through a lot of changes. There's a lot of paranoia, there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of like uncertainty. And one of the things that can kind of give you hope or give you a sense of comfort is being around your community or being able to keep in contact with your community. So, regardless of who that community is, it might have changed because of the pandemic. I think a lot of people have learned a lot of things about communities around them now. And that might have shifted which communities they now align themselves with. And I think that's important because, you know, like I said, these are the people who are with you when things are going on. These are the people who understand you because you've got common interests and common activities that you like to do. So, yeah, community is super important because as the world changes and restructures itself, you want to make sure that you've got the people you trust to kind of help you fit into wherever the world is going, but also the people who you can open up to, because a lot of the change can be scary. So you need people who you can trust with your emotions and trust with your feelings so that you can move forward.
And I like how you say like your definition of community is always changing because you're right because as human being, even though it's really hard for right now when
Mhm,
we meet people that when we meet people during uh, event that align with our interests. We
mhm,
add those people into our bubble, and that's our community because we're networking, we're talking about commonalities, we're talking about the same interests, and we give that support to one another.
Mhm.
And you mentioned about the word is changing. So my next question is, because with the Black Lives Matter movement that is going on over the summer and still is going on even today,
Mhm.
what does it mean to be anti-racist?
So for me, I think being anti-racist is about calling out injustices and I guess just being honest when people are acting out of prejudice. I think a lot of times we get uncomfortable about labeling someone a racist because like, oh, I don't want to come off as judgmental or labeling someone the wrong thing. But chances are, if you felt provoked to say that someone is racist, they probably are being racist because you wouldn't just say that if someone just did something normal, right? There's clearly some kind of malicious intent or they're trying to do some kind of wrong towards you. And I know a lot of it can be hard to see because um, a lot of the racism that we're looking at now, I guess, is systematic, right? And these are things that have been in our environment, in our workplaces, in our educational spaces for so long that calling it racism sounds weird because they're like, no, but it's always been like that. It's like, well, it's always been racist then, you know? So for me, anti-racism is first of all acknowledging what is wrong and calling it what it is, because once you've explained what it is, we can then work to fix it. And that's what makes it so important, because until something is like, until you call a spade, you don't know what to dig. You've got to be like, this what it is, and now we can work through it. But until that's acknowledged, you can't move on to the next step.
Yeah, definitely. And I totally agree with you when you say that. Yeah, when you say people were like, oh, blessing it off and say it always been like that. Yeah. You're
Mm,
like, oh, but it's always been racist and people don't understand like that is colonization.
yeah,
Our country is
yeah,
most countries in the world is built on
yeah,
racism, and we need to decolonize ourselves. But
yeah.
going back to your answer with anti-racism,
Hmm.
because people do swap, because you made a comment about others, mm, others denying it, or like others thinking calling someone a racist is like taboo or something. But uh, what if, like, do you think not being a racist and anti and practicing anti-racism is the same thing, or are they two different things?
Okay. Let me just confirm that I understood the question. Um, so you're asking if not being racist and being anti-racist are part of the same thing or if they're completely different.
Yeah.
Okay. Good question. I've never thought about that. But off the top of my head, um, I think anti-racism is the next step after not being racist. Because, like I said, anti-racism is about calling things out. It's like saying, this is what's wrong. Not being a racist is, there's nothing wrong with it. It just is also not actionable, because you're just like, okay, I just won't do racist things. Okay, cool. But that doesn't mean that racism around you stops, right? So, like, it's not bad in itself, but it's not productive either because it doesn't get anything done. So what you'd want is, if someone was racist, you want to then get them to the not racist part, fantastic. They're not doing racist things anymore. But now that they understand what it is to be racist, you want to get them to be anti-racist, because then they can start working towards fixing the issues that they may have caused themselves, or helping fix greater issues. Because um yeah, like there's a certain I guess you'd have to be in a certain group of people to be non-affected by non-racist people, if that makes sense. Like if you are, let's say for example, I'm black, I work in a business, in a corporation, whatever, and all my immediate coworkers are not racist. Fantastic. It means when I talk to them, they don't say anything shady, they're not doing anything against me. Awesome. But it also means that if my boss was racist, they're unlikely to do anything to step in to help me, because they're just not racist. They're not anti-racist. Whereas if we had anti-racist coworkers, they're probably the type to say, hey, you know what? I don't think I'm racist, but let's take an anti-racism course. I want to learn more about what anti-racism is like and what I can do to contribute to make it a better workspace for all employees. So in that sense, there's nothing wrong with being not racist, but there's definitely a lot more productivity that comes from being anti-racist, because then you're solving a problem that everyone is experiencing, as opposed to, if it doesn't affect you, you're like, no, this is fine.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And I like, because I never thought of that until you put it out that way of like, it's like taking baby steps. First,
Mhm,
you need to be not racist. You need
mhm.
to acknowledge that you should see everyone the same way and acknowledge that everyone has differences. But then you have to actually take some action and to make it fair for everyone.
Yeah.
Like I like how you put that in perspective because I do struggle with trying to understand just that
Mm.
question you, but I love when you share your answer. So thank you so much.
No, my pleasure. Thanks. It was a great question. Honestly, like I had to think about it. I was like,
And then my other question to you is like you talk about being black and like your experiences and stuff. So when you think about your own personal experiences, how did you obtain a knowledge base in these issues of equity, of equity, diversity, inclusion, and social justice?
so I think in my case, a part of a lot of my learning to do with racism came from my learning to do with anything that's got to do like consent training or gender-based violence or bystander intervention. So these are a couple of like um, topics that I used to look up at the university or be involved in organizations that did consent work. And I think you mentioned the word earlier on in this conversation, intersectionality, where there's different issues that different groups of people face, but there tends to be an overlap. And obviously, a lot of things that someone might face because of what gender they identify as or present as can be similar issues or obstacles that they might face as a person of color. So it's weird for me. As much as I know about racism, I actually haven't experienced a lot of it myself. I've experienced like obviously microaggressions, and I think that is still an experience of racism. But given the extreme cases I've seen, like on social media, people losing lives or having actual hurt and injuries put on them, I'm like, whoa, I've never experienced racism to that extent. I've experienced it where I'm like, okay, you're saying dumb things, I'm gonna walk away now, and like that kind of thing, you know. It's like, but at least I could walk away from it.
Yeah,
So a lot of my like deep learning in racism has actually come from reading. One book that was really good in teaching me that was Hood Feminism, and it's just about how it kind of looks at how, as a movement, feminism was really based on white feminists, and there's a lot of overlap, which was not overlap. There's a lot of like spaces which didn't help feminists of color or female identifying people of color, and how the the new wave of feminism needs to adapt these principles to think about, look, there's a certain reason why feminism here looks different from feminism there, because the resources that you have are different, the education you have is different, your options are different, and because a lot of that is based on race, I was like, oh wow, I never thought about this as a race thing, but now I see it, like, so I learned a lot just from that book.
yeah, absolutely. And in the conference that I was in this week, they talk about gender based analysis, and how like they talk about like white feminism, black feminism, and also different kinds of intersectionalities and stuff. And I find that really appealing that they were like they were like Kimberly and some kids like, look, this is not being addressed as a black woman. We need to talk about other barriers that is applying to us, and we need to address it. And I think it's sad, like he talked about it like 30 years. Yeah, I think 30 years ago, them got me on it, but like early, late, I think 89 or 90s or like 2000, but it's a long time because now people are like, oh, intersectionality. Oh, I never thought of that. I just like race is race, gender is gender, sex is sex. Like
Mhm.
there's so much complexity to someone's identity, right?
Yeah, that's so true.
Yeah, Ben. Like my other question to you is that, like, so this interview, like, I'm trying to like show people that
Mhm.
we can have conversation, like the conversation shouldn't be like, oh wait, you gone to first, so always not right, because I will feel uncomfortable. But what advice? But how can we start the conversation with
Mhm.
others
Mhm.
to people who are not informed, and to the people who are not really like are really stuck in their own bubble, basically.
So that one's a tough one because you never want to force your ideologies or your thoughts on someone else, especially if they're not ready to hear them. And sometimes that can have the opposite effect. When you're trying to teach someone about something and they refuse to listen to it, they automatically get turned off by that idea. So now the next time that they hear intersectionality, like, oh, this word again, so it's weird because this puts a lot of responsibility on the person trying to teach instead of the person trying to learn. But you also need to wait for the person to get to that point where they want to learn. And I think what it is just you've got to be gentle with it. You've got to explain something to someone, see how they react. If they receive it well, you give them more information. If not, you just say, well, listen, those are my thoughts. Here's a link if you want to see more. Here's a video if you want to learn more. And you take a step back, you know. And the reason I say that is because I've seen some people where I thought they were a lost cause. And then one day they're like, you know what? I actually went back to that conversation we had and I watched that video and this makes a lot more sense to me now. You know, that day I was upset or something had happened, but now that I'm calm now, I can actually see what you're saying. And obviously that's a bit slower than just like telling everybody, watch this, watch this, watch this, watch this, right? But I think you'd rather have one person who gets to that point on their own than trying to force 10 people, because that one person will now continue that process. Now they'll go to someone else and slowly get them to see something. And like slowly we get everybody learning and in their own way and at their own pace. Um, I also think it's important that you make sure that you yourself are informed, because there's times where we just know a lot of the buzzwords or the buzz articles, and someone will ask you something, and you're like, "Oh yeah, I know about this," and then they say, "Well, did you know that these are the actual stats?" And then you look down when you're like, "Oh, really? Ah, I didn't know that." you know, so it's important to fact check and make sure that whatever you're saying is true, um, but also just to make sure that you have a big understanding, because I think also the more you understand about a topic, the easier it is to explain it, because you now have several points that you can bring it forward from. So if you had, we'll go back to the idea of the hip hop community. And we know that from a very broad perspective, hip hop can be looked at as very misogynistic and very homophobic. So to try and tell a hip hop head something that might be feminist might not work if that's kind of mindset at the end. They're like, oh, no, hip hop's all about being a macho man. And then, but if you happen to know more information about hip hop itself and mention that, hey, did you know that the very first successful hip hop song, Rapper's Delight, was produced by a female? Her name is Sylvia Roberts, and she's Robinson, and she's considered the grandmother of hip hop. And at that point, now they have to think, oh, she's telling me that women have been involved in hip hop since like the beginning. It's like, yep,
Yeah.
and then like that might upset them, but that might also make them think, huh, interesting, so they'll go in, start doing a bit more research, and that's maybe how they get into feminism, because now they realize, oh cool, women helped bring us hip-hop, so now I'm more curious about women's involvement in hip-hop, and hopefully that eventually leads to them learning more about feminism. So, and I think the same thing can be done with racism or any kind of systematic change we're trying to make. The more you can find an entry point for someone else and then let them continue the information or the search or uh, I guess educational growth on their own.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like you got a bit on it. Like I feel like when you're trying to like explain to people like
Mm,
your ideas,
mm,
it's it's okay to for people to make mistakes. You shouldn't jump on them and be like, "Hey, you cannot say this. Hey, you should get more educated," because they're like, we're all we're all learning. It's
mhm.
it's our ongoing issue that passed along in so many generations in
Yeah,
the beginning of time.
yeah.
Nobody is expert on like social issues. So I feel like the thing is like you said it right, like we need to be patient, we need to be more understanding, we
Mm,
need to be more strategic and
mhm,
more gentle when we approach children. don't be like stuffing down their throat and nagging them on. Like, like as kids, how many times are we not listening to our parents when they're nagging or not?
True.
Not a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. You
Yeah,
just kind of freak out. The minute someone's like shouting something down, shouting something at you, you zone out. You're like, I don't want to hear this.
yeah, definitely. And I got two more questions for you, but yeah, but talking about like bringing up the conversation to people, what advice would you give people to to acknowledge to become anti-racism and practice anti-racist practices?
Mm. So I'd piggyback off something you said, where you mentioned that people need to learn to embrace the mistakes. And I think that's super important. Like when you tell someone about anti-racism or decolonization, don't make it sound as if they have to learn everything in one go. Like, don't be like, oh, by tomorrow I'm going to test you and find out what you know. It's like, no, here's a book. If books aren't for you, here's an audiobook, here's a podcast, here's a song, so you need to find whatever kind of medium works for them and then put no pressure. Just be like, look, this is something that's important to me. And I'd love for you to kind of get a better understanding of it. And I think with that, they see that you're coming from a place of care as opposed to well, I'm black, so you should know this. And it's like, I mean, you're not wrong. They should, because if you're their friend, they want to look after you.
Yeah,
But that doesn't sound like you're doing it because you want them to care about you. It's almost like an obligation.
yeah,
And it comes back to the whole idea of like, when someone's throwing something down your throat, you don't want to accept it, right? So if
yeah,
you can present it in a way that, look, I care about you and I know you care about me, please just have a look into this and learn it at your own pace. But it's just the effort. Like if you can just show that, look, I would just really appreciate the effort in you trying to do this. It's not easy to understand. It can be frustrating because just there's a lot to learn. It could make you feel guilty. It could make you feel uncomfortable. But I think, like we said at the beginning of this, you just gotta you gotta lean into the discomfort because if we all stayed where we're comfortable, nothing would ever get done. You've gotta push your limits, obviously respect your own boundaries, but you've got to step into the uncomfortable every once in a while because that's where great change comes from.
exactly. And like, if you wanna grow as a person and experience happiness in life, you need
Mhm.
to get give you need to feel that discomfort once in a while. You're like challenge yourself.
Yeah.
Because life would be really boring if
Hmm.
you're not, right?
Yeah.
So one last question, and yeah, I asked you so many times. Yeah, I definitely asked you so many times.
At
And
least twice. I've had this question at least twice.
yeah, definitely in some kind of qualification or like facilitating form, but give me one word to describe your hopes for tomorrow.
Okay. So today's word, this session's word, will be disruption. I think in the past, I think I gave a lot more like fun words. I think it was patience or acceptance. But
Yeah,
disruption, I think, is important too, because I think we've talked a lot about change and um, no longer accepting things as they were before and just saying that, oh, this is how it was before, so we'll just continue as is. So I think disruption is very important because I think the whole of last year was a lot about accommodating, like not accommodating, but shifting mindset, just with the pandemic, people had to learn to respect other people's space and learn to like social distance despite us being social beings. Obviously, with a lot of the violence that went on, people had to learn to accept that, look, racism is still very alive and very present. But with both happening at the same time, I think a lot of our systems got shaken, political systems, educational systems. And I think that disruption is good because, again, like if we're working from a place of comfort, nothing gets changed. Like, oh, this is how we've always been taught, that's fine. But, suddenly we have to learn over Zoom. And it's like, wait, so for anyone who had maybe a physical um, disability, they could have been learning from home all this time. We could have accommodated them, So now that the system has been disrupted, we can now learn to use that disruption to like improve things, right? But until it was disrupted, we would have always assumed, oh no, it's impossible to go to university from home, So for me, that word gives me hope because with disruption will come a building of something new and better. So my word today is disruption.
Oh yeah, by the way, I like how you use your two previous words of hope and Jason because I was like, wow, but yeah, I totally agree with you. Like, this Watson is a key fact because we aim to dismantle
Mm,
the systems of oppression, and
mm,
how do we do that? We
mhm,
need to get it. We need to challenge people. We need to challenge the system.
mm. It's true. I agree.
And I wanna say thank you so much for letting me interview you again. I know you're probably a little bit tired seeing my face, hearing my beautiful voice, but I'm always appreciative, learning from you, listening to you, and seeing your beautiful face and your beautiful soul, of course.
Thanks, Lionel. No, it's great. I think I really enjoy these conversations because um I think sometimes you just kind of live through things and you don't really reflect on what you're learning and how you're growing through each experience. So this is always a good reflection period for me. I think also the work that you do both as CDLI and just your own personal stuff is great. So to be able to help you do that, I'm like, yeah, I'd love to help you in any way possible. And you just got such a warm smile, dude. Like you
I,
crack jokes,
I
you start
try.
smiling, I start smiling. So I'm very, very happy to see your face. Could never get bored of
You make me smile, but
it.
yeah, that want everyone to know that I'm gonna continue the conversation with different individuals because I feel like they the docent you probably felt the same way. Conversation like this is very important resulting in our the systemic issues happening. We should address it and learn to respect each other and you also learn from each other.
Exactly.
Yeah. Anyway, bye everyone.
Bye, everyone.